Please leave a comment where you are watching from. It was supposed to be the ultimate spring break, the kind my friends and I had dreamed of for months. Between classes, exams, and endless projects, the idea of a secluded getaway had become our collective obsession. We needed an escape from crowded halls and endless deadlines, somewhere tranquil, simple, far from the constant hum of civilization. After weeks spent trawling rental websites, Olivia finally stumbled upon a perfect spot, a modest seaside cabin set against a backdrop of swaying palms and distant surf. The place wasn't flashy. There was no infinity pool or overpriced restaurant. It didn't boast luxury amenities or Instagram-ready architecture. Instead, the cabin had charm, an unpretentious beauty built into its weathered walls, nestled quietly where dense woods gave way to soft sands and the murmuring waves of the Atlantic. We arrived just as the sun was lowering over the horizon, bathing everything in gold. As the car rolled to a stop, Olivia stepped out first, breathing deeply and smiling widely. "This is it," she said softly. Her voice echoed the relief we all felt. Jack grabbed a cooler from the back, instantly handing out drinks, as if it were his duty to kickstart our vacation. Layla tossed her suitcase onto the porch, surveying our temporary home with appreciation. "Exactly what we needed," she declared, pulling her sunglasses off with exaggerated drama. "Peace at last." We wasted no time settling in. The inside of the cabin smelled faintly of salt and cedar. The rustic decor felt welcoming rather than outdated. Large windows framed the endless ocean, capturing the sea's shifting moods. As we unpacked, the stress we'd carried from school seemed to slip away effortlessly. The first night was ideal, picture-perfect in every way. We fired up the grill, sizzling burgers and veggies under the velvet sky. Jack spun playful stories by the fire pit, his laughter contagious. We shared jokes, memories, dreams, and secrets, each of us wrapped in the warmth of friendship and moonlit quiet. Yet, as the hour grew later, a strange unease began to settle over me. It was subtle at first, a vague feeling like the air itself had shifted, thickened somehow. The breeze, which had been gently comforting earlier, became almost too still, as if holding its breath. I shook it off as mere imagination, fatigue from the long drive, or perhaps one too many of Jack's infamous ghost stories. Eventually, everyone drifted off inside, leaving me alone by the dying embers of the fire. The stars shone brightly overhead, their glow mirrored faintly by the dark waves. Despite the beauty around me, the unease lingered. The silence felt heavier, the quiet no longer peaceful but tense, as if the very ocean was wary. Then I heard it, faint crunching sounds, like gravel beneath cautious footsteps. My heart quickened. Turning quickly, I scanned the area. The porch was empty, bathed in ghostly silver moonlight, shadows stretching long and strange across the ground. I called out softly, half hoping it was Jack or Olivia pulling a prank. No answer came. Just silence, deeper now oppressive. My skin prickled, and for the first time, the cabin's isolation felt menacing instead of inviting. I hurried back inside, locking the door firmly behind me. Inside, the cabin's shadows seemed to deepen, each creak of wood magnified in the eerie quiet. I tried to sleep, but rest wouldn't come. Every rustle, every distant groan of the cabin seemed amplified, echoing loudly in my anxious mind. Suddenly, a sharp knock shattered the silence. My pulse spiked, and panic surged through me. The knock came again, frantic and loud. Quickly, I woke the others, my voice trembling with urgency. "There's someone outside," I whispered, eyes wide with fear. Olivia looked confused, Jack skeptical, but Layla immediately sensed my dread. We stood frozen as another knock sounded, this time accompanied by a muffled plea, a woman's voice, desperate and frightened. "Please help me, please." My gut churned with conflict, torn between caution and compassion. Jack moved first, cautiously approaching the door, peering through the tiny peephole. He jerked back suddenly, his expression horrified. "There's something moving out there," he whispered harshly. A shadow, it darted past the porch. The scratching came next, an awful dragging sound against the wood, slow, deliberate, malicious. We staggered backward, nerves frayed. Jack fumbled for his phone, ready to call for help, but the screen showed no bars. Isolation had lost its charm entirely. The scratching stopped abruptly. Silence returned, thick and heavy. None of us dared move. Minutes ticked by painfully until finally, convinced the danger had passed, we crept outside cautiously, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The porch was empty. No sign of anyone. Gravel undisturbed, sand pristine. It was as if nothing had happened at all, except we all felt it, that watchful presence, invisible eyes fixed firmly upon us. Back inside, sleep remained elusive. We huddled together, unsettled and fearful. Every sound became sinister, every shadow filled with menace. Hours passed, and I couldn't endure the tension any longer. I slipped quietly onto the porch again, desperate for fresh air. The night had grown colder, the stars dimmed by gathering clouds. Stepping toward the edge of the yard, my heart seized. Standing at the tree line was a figure, human-shaped but oddly distorted, impossibly still, just watching. I felt frozen, unable to scream or move. It didn't approach, merely stood, unwavering in its vigil. Fear spiked through me. Slowly, heart hammering, I backed away, stumbling back inside, locking the door securely behind me. "There's something out there," I gasped to my friends. "We have to go." We grabbed our belongings hurriedly, terror-driven, packing quickly and silently. Just as we stepped out, keys clenched tightly, the porch lights flickered and died completely. The cabin felt alive now, oppressive and hostile, the air charged with menace. In a blind panic, we rushed toward the car. As I slid behind the wheel, headlights illuminated the same shadowy figure, closer now, gliding forward with unnatural motion. Its arms were outstretched strangely, beckoning us closer. I slammed on the accelerator, tires spinning wildly as we tore away, racing toward civilization, safety, anywhere but here. Nobody spoke during the drive back. Our vacation, our carefully planned escape, was utterly destroyed, replaced by an unspoken dread we couldn't shake. Reporting it seemed impossible. Who would believe us? Who would understand what we'd felt, seen? We simply drove home, spring break forever changed, haunted by the memory of quiet shores and dark figures standing silently in moonlight. We never spoke about that cabin again. We didn't have to. The experience etched itself deeply enough that none of us would ever forget. For us, spring break had become something else entirely, an eerie reminder that sometimes silence holds secrets, secrets better left undisturbed. Spring break had finally arrived, and with it came that carefree excitement we'd been craving all semester. The four of us, Noah, Ellie, Tyler, and myself, had been looking forward to a quiet escape, away from the usual chaos. Our destination was a laid-back coastal town, small enough to feel forgotten, with beaches stretching endlessly and the soft crash of ocean waves promising to drown out all the noise we left behind. The town was sleepy, almost surreal in its simplicity. Narrow streets wound lazily past pastel cottages, quaint storefronts, and stretches of sand that seemed to glow softly under the fading sun. It felt removed from time itself, a perfect place to unwind and forget about the pressures awaiting us back home. We rented a small cottage nestled among dunes and scrub grass. The view from the porch opened directly onto the ocean, its expanse unbroken save for a weathered pier extending out over the dark water. It was old, made of ancient timbers that groaned underfoot, but to us it looked charming, a relic of simpler days. The first few nights were exactly as we imagined. We lounged around bonfires, cooked dinners beneath the stars, and laughed until our sides ached. It was everything a spring break should be, calm, comfortable, and completely stress-free. But on the last night, something shifted. We had spent the evening at a small beach bar nearby, sipping drinks and listening to the mellow guitar drifting from hidden speakers. Around midnight, the crowd began thinning, and the four of us decided on a final stroll down the beach, toward that old pier. The moon was bright enough to illuminate our path clearly, casting silvery reflections across the sand. The waves crashed gently, rhythmic and calming. Tyler, always restless, led the way, tossing jokes into the night air, laughing loudly enough to disturb the silence. Ellie and Noah followed closely, leaving me slightly behind, enjoying the quiet solitude of the ocean. As we approached the pier, something caught my eye, a figure sitting near its edge, legs dangling above the dark water. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, dressed in faded jeans and a worn, hooded jacket that concealed most of his face. Something about the way he stared out to sea, unmoving, troubled me deeply. "Who's that guy?" Ellie whispered, clearly unsettled. Tyler shrugged carelessly. "Just a local, probably," he said, though his tone lacked confidence. As we passed, the man spoke abruptly, his voice gruff and tired. "I wouldn't go out there tonight if I were you." Tyler paused, turning back to him, skepticism evident. "Why not?" The stranger didn't look our way, his gaze locked firmly onto the ocean. Some things should stay below the surface. His cryptic words hung heavy in the air, creating an uncomfortable silence. Noah tugged at Ellie's arm, urging us to continue, dismissing the man as eccentric or drunk. Still, a cold chill had settled inside me, prickling uncomfortably along my spine. We hesitated for a moment but pushed onward, stepping carefully onto the old pier. With each step, it creaked beneath us, swaying gently in the breeze. At its end, the waves churned darkly beneath us, their depths unfathomable. We stood quietly for a moment, looking out into the night, lulled by the quiet hum of the sea. But soon, another sound caught our attention, a low, sorrowful groan rising from beneath the pier. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the waves themselves, but it quickly grew clearer, more distinct. It didn't sound natural, certainly not like anything we'd heard before. Ellie grabbed my arm tightly. "Did you hear that?" Before I could answer, the noise intensified, a deep, tortured moan echoing from below, strangely human yet entirely alien. The sound resonated through the wooden planks beneath our feet, vibrating with a chilling clarity. A sickening dread settled heavily in my chest. Suddenly, footsteps pounded onto the pier behind us. We spun around to see the stranger, breathing heavily, his face pale under the moonlight. "You need to leave now," he urged, eyes wild with urgency. "What's down there?" Tyler demanded, fear threading through his bravado. The man's voice shook. "Something old, something hungry. It waits for nights like this." My stomach turned. He wasn't drunk, and he wasn't joking. The fear in his eyes was raw and real. But before we could move, the ocean erupted violently, water spraying upward as something massive broke the surface. We stared, paralyzed by fear. It was huge, its form twisted and monstrous, barely illuminated by the moonlight. Slick skin gleamed, reflecting a sickly sheen as long, unnatural limbs stretched out from the water. Its face, if one could call it that, was grotesquely distorted, a swollen mask of agony with dark, hollow eyes staring hungrily toward us. Ellie screamed, her voice drowned out by the thing's guttural roar. Noah grabbed her, pulling her back toward land. Tyler stumbled, frozen momentarily by horror. The stranger stood, unflinching, between us and the creature. "Run!" he shouted, voice hoarse with desperation. That command shattered our paralysis. We sprinted wildly, racing back down the creaking pier, hearts pounding, breaths shallow with terror. I glanced back just long enough to see the stranger standing firm as the creature lunged upward, massive hands reaching out, gripping the wooden beams as it tried to climb toward us. We made it to shore, collapsing onto the sand in shock and disbelief. Panting, Ellie cried softly into Noah's shoulder. Tyler's face was blank, disbelieving, while I stared numbly at the pier. The creature had vanished, retreating beneath the waves, but the silence that remained felt heavier, more dreadful than before. We found no trace of the man afterward, no indication he'd ever been there. Locals acted confused when we asked, brushing it off as imagination or drunken delusion. The pier in daylight appeared harmless, ordinary, just old wood and faded paint. But we knew better. We packed quickly the next morning, quiet, each of us struggling to comprehend what we'd experienced. None of us voiced it aloud, but we knew we'd glimpsed something that didn't belong here, something dark, hidden deep beneath the ocean, waiting patiently for nights like that one. As we drove away, the ocean receded behind us, calm once more beneath the morning sun, as if nothing had happened. But the memory lingered, etched sharply in our minds, a terrible secret hidden below the surface, forever changing how we'd see the sea. When spring break rolled around, most of my classmates headed toward crowded beaches and wild parties, eager to escape the stress of college life. I wasn't like them. The thought of being crammed into noisy clubs and crowded hotel rooms left me exhausted before even stepping out the door. My idea of relaxation was simpler: quiet, peace, and time away from everyone and everything. My closest friend, Mara, shared that sentiment. We both craved the same solitude and serenity, so when Mara suggested we rent a cabin tucked away in the mountains, I jumped at the idea. Far from noise, people, and distractions, we'd have space to breathe, to reset. We set out early, the city slowly fading behind us as we drove deeper into the wilderness. The highway turned into winding roads, then narrow paths that cut through towering trees and shadowy forests. By the time we reached the cabin, the sense of isolation was absolute. It was perfect, a rustic log cabin nestled at the edge of a thick pine forest. The cabin itself was charmingly simple, built from aged wood, with windows that overlooked endless, untamed wilderness. Inside, a stone fireplace dominated the main room, cozy armchairs scattered around invitingly. Large beams stretched overhead, giving the place a comforting sturdiness. The first day passed peacefully. We spent hours cooking, laughing, and reminiscing, grateful to escape the pressures of school. Evening fell gently, painting the sky deep shades of purple and blue. We sat on the porch, breathing in the fresh, crisp mountain air. Everything was quiet, beautifully, refreshingly quiet. But when night came, something shifted. At first, it was subtle, the wind picking up, branches tapping lightly against the windows. Harmless noises, I thought. But as the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the atmosphere had grown heavier, denser. It was as if the woods were closing in, pressing silently against the cabin. Mara had fallen asleep easily, but I lay awake, increasingly restless. Every sound seemed magnified now. The creak of timber, the rustle of leaves, the distant whisper of the trees. Each noise seemed deliberate, purposeful. Something felt wrong. Then came the footsteps. Slow and deliberate, crunching softly on the fallen leaves outside. My heart skipped. I froze, breath shallow, listening intently. Was it an animal? Surely there was wildlife out here. Yet the steps felt cautious, too careful to belong to an animal. "Mara?" I whispered, gently shaking her awake. She blinked sleepily at first, but quickly registered my urgency. "What's wrong?" "I think there's someone outside." She hesitated, listening. For a moment, silence returned, absolute and oppressive. Then, unmistakably, the footsteps resumed, circling the cabin slowly, deliberately. Fear flickered across Mara's face, mirroring my own. "Maybe it's just the wind," she whispered doubtfully. But the steps grew louder, more confident, until they paused right outside our door. I held my breath, hoping desperately they'd move on, but instead, 3 clear knocks echoed through the quiet cabin, each slow and precise. We stared at each other, hearts racing. Who could it be out here? Mara's voice was barely audible. My mouth was dry, words failing me. Cautiously, we moved closer, straining to hear. No further sounds. Gathering courage, Mara peered through the window, eyes wide with apprehension. "There's no one there," she whispered, visibly shaken. "The porch is empty." Dread settled deep within me, twisting uncomfortably. We stood frozen, unsure what to do next. The air in the cabin grew colder, pressing in from all sides, suffocatingly heavy. Mara grabbed her phone, only to discover there was no reception, no way to call for help or reassurance. We tried to calm ourselves, blaming imagination or wildlife, but the silence outside felt unnatural, heavy, as though the woods themselves were holding their breath. Just as we began to settle again, the lights flickered once, then plunged us into total darkness. Panic surged. I fumbled for a flashlight, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Then came another sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping on the window, gentle but unmistakably purposeful. My blood turned cold. Mara's face paled in the faint glow of the flashlight, her eyes wide and terrified. "Who's there?" she called, voice quivering. No answer, just the tapping, growing louder, more persistent. Then came a sharp, grating sound, like something hard being dragged deliberately across the glass. I felt rooted to the floor, fear holding me captive. Before we could react further, the window shattered, sending shards of glass scattering across the floor. Mara screamed, and instinct took over. We sprinted toward the back door, desperate to escape whatever had come for us. As we burst outside, cold air bit sharply against our skin. We stumbled blindly into the dense woods, panic driving us deeper, branches scratching and tearing at our skin. Footsteps echoed behind us, quick and relentless, snapping twigs and crunching leaves. We ran without direction until we finally burst onto a small, winding road, breathless, trembling, and exhausted. Headlights approached in the distance, cutting through the dark. We flagged down the car frantically. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, took one look at us and immediately ushered us inside. "Where did you come from?" he asked gently, concern etched clearly in his expression. We babbled explanations, breathless and terrified, begging him to drive us to safety. He listened carefully, eyes darkening as we described the cabin. "You shouldn't have stayed out there," he murmured finally, voice heavy with sadness. "Some places aren't meant for visitors." We went straight to the local sheriff, reporting our terrifying encounter. When deputies escorted us back to the cabin, we found it silent, peaceful, untouched, as though we'd imagined everything. The window was whole, unbroken. No footprints, no evidence of an intruder. Just quiet woods and a perfectly normal cabin. Yet Mara and I knew what we'd experienced. We left immediately, abandoning our planned retreat and the quiet mountain town behind. For months, we'd counted down the days until spring break, eager for a chance to escape the pressures of school and city life. When our friend Ava suggested we rent an isolated cabin deep in the Appalachian foothills, it seemed perfect, exactly what we needed. The idea of seclusion, nature, and simplicity was irresistible. Our group consisted of Ava, whose enthusiasm could brighten even the gloomiest day, Mason, always calm and grounded, Lily, endlessly curious and ready for adventure, and me, Ethan, forever cautious but eager to unwind. The cabin Ava found online was described as rustic, cozy, and far from civilization. That suited us perfectly. The drive up to the mountains was long but exhilarating. The road gradually narrowed from highway to dirt path, twisting through dense, silent woods that seemed untouched by time. By late afternoon we arrived. The cabin sat nestled among towering trees and dense underbrush, its wooden exterior weathered and welcoming. Large windows promised sweeping views of the forest, and a wide porch wrapped around its front, overlooking a misty valley below. We quickly unpacked, exploring the small, comfortable rooms, marveling at the old stone fireplace and creaking floors. For a brief moment, it felt as if we'd stepped back into another era, a simpler, quieter world far removed from our daily chaos. The first evening passed peacefully. Ava cooked dinner, and we sat around the fireplace, laughing and sharing stories. As darkness fell, a soft rain began, drumming gently against the roof. Everything felt right, comfortably tranquil. But by the second night, the atmosphere had shifted. The rain had stopped, leaving behind an oppressive silence. The air felt thick and humid, the trees looming dark and motionless around us. As we settled into our rooms, a sense of unease began to creep into my mind, faint, yet undeniable. Sleep eluded me. Each sound became magnified, the gentle creaking of the cabin, branches brushing softly against the window panes, distant rustling outside. I tried to dismiss it as harmless wildlife, the woods alive with nocturnal creatures. Yet something about these sounds felt deliberate, unsettling. Then, just past midnight, the silence was shattered by 3 sharp, unmistakable knocks on the cabin's front door. My breath caught sharply in my chest. For a moment, everything was still before another knock, more forceful, insistent. Panic surged through me. I hurriedly woke the others, their confusion quickly turning to concern as we gathered quietly in the living room. "Did you hear it too?" Mason whispered, his usual calmness shaken. Before we could reply, a voice echoed softly from outside, barely audible, pleading, "Please, let me in." We froze, exchanging nervous glances. "Maybe someone needs help," Ava whispered hesitantly, her natural kindness warring with fear. I moved cautiously toward the door, peering through a narrow gap in the curtain. The porch was empty, bathed in pale moonlight. Nothing stirred. Just darkness and silence. "There's nobody out there," I said uneasily. The knocking resumed suddenly louder, more frantic now, almost desperate. This time, Mason moved swiftly to check again. Once more, no one was there. "It doesn't make sense," Lily whispered shakily, her eyes wide and fearful. Inside, the air grew colder, heavy and oppressive. We huddled together, whispering anxiously, unable to understand what was happening. It wasn't long before we noticed something even more disturbing. Faint whispers seemed to drift through the walls, barely audible, yet unmistakable. "Help me, please." They seemed to come from everywhere at once, soft, sorrowful, echoing in the darkness. Ava's eyes filled with dread, her hands trembling slightly. "What's going on?" Desperation took over, and Mason suggested checking around the cabin. Armed with flashlights, we stepped carefully outside, our beams cutting through the darkness. Nothing moved, and no footprints disturbed the damp earth. It was as if no one had ever been there. Yet, the sense of being watched was overwhelming, the silence unnatural. Returning inside, our fear only intensified. The whispers continued intermittently, coming from nowhere, floating through the walls and floors as if the cabin itself spoke. "I can't stay here," Lily said finally, voice shaking. "We need to leave." But the roads back through the mountains were treacherous at night, too dangerous to risk. We decided reluctantly to wait until dawn. Sleep, however, was impossible. Instead, we sat close by the fireplace, waiting anxiously for morning. Around 3 o'clock, a new sound startled us, a faint scratching noise from the second floor, persistent and deliberate, like something clawing slowly across wood. Each scrape echoed through the silent cabin, drawing our frightened gazes upward. Gathering courage, we climbed the stairs together, following the sound to a small bedroom at the end of the hall. With a deep breath, Mason pushed open the door. The room was empty, untouched. Yet as Ava's flashlight swept across the wall, we saw something that froze us completely. Deep, Jagged scratches scarred the wooden surface, marks that hadn't been there before, fresh and starkly vivid. Panic took hold. Mason backed out quickly, shaking his head in disbelief. "We're leaving now." Frantically we packed, adrenaline driving every movement. As we rushed outside, a single chilling whisper trailed behind us from within the cabin, clearer than before. "Don't leave me." We didn't stop running until we reached the car, breathless and shaken. As we sped away from that isolated place, dawn finally began to break, casting gentle light over the trees. But nothing felt comforting. Behind us, hidden deep within the woods, something remained, lonely, unseen, desperate to be heard. Days later, we discovered the cabin had a troubled history. Rumors whispered about disappearances, unexplained events, and visitors fleeing in terror. But authorities found nothing unusual, dismissing claims as superstitious fears. Yet we knew what we'd experienced. The whispers, the scratches, the unseen presence, we couldn't simply dismiss it. Something had been trapped there, desperately seeking acknowledgement, perhaps freedom. And though we tried to forget, each night, as darkness fell, I could still hear those echoes faintly, forever lingering. "Please, don't leave me alone." When spring break arrived, all we wanted was a simple escape. School had been relentless, a whirlwind of papers, exams, and late-night study sessions. So when my best friend, Hayden, suggested renting a remote beach house in a quiet, off-the-map coastal town, it sounded like the perfect solution. The town itself was barely a dot on the map. No tourists, no bustling nightlife, just miles of empty beaches, rolling waves, and solitude. Joining Hayden and me were Emma, who craved adventure at every turn, and Lucas, whose quiet demeanor and dry humor kept us balanced. We arrived just before sunset, the horizon painted in shades of fiery orange and soft purple. The house was quaint, weather-beaten, yet charming. It perched on a gentle rise overlooking the ocean, windows large enough to capture the endless sea view. At first glance, it felt peaceful, perfect even, but as soon as we stepped inside, an uneasy feeling crept over me, something I couldn't quite place. The first evening passed comfortably enough, filled with laughter, drinks, and the gentle roar of the ocean just beyond our door. Still, despite our attempts at relaxation, I couldn't shake that strange, unsettling feeling. It was subtle, nothing more than a vague sense of unease, yet persistent enough to linger in the back of my mind. That night, sleep proved difficult. Every noise, the gentle tapping of branches against windows, the distant creak of wood, made me tense. Eventually, though, exhaustion won, pulling me into restless dreams. Sometime after midnight, I woke abruptly. At first, I wasn't sure why, my heart pounding as if startled by something. Then, softly at first but growing steadily louder, came the unmistakable sound of footsteps dragging through the gravel outside our house. My breath caught sharply. Who would be out here at this hour? "Lucas?" I whispered, hoping he was awake too. Only silence answered. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, moving back and forth near our front porch. Unease twisted my stomach, and reluctantly, I got out of bed, creeping toward the window to peer outside. In the pale glow of moonlight, the gravel path appeared empty. Yet, even as I stared, the sound persisted, clear, impossible to deny. It was as if an invisible presence paced just beyond my vision, mocking my inability to see it. Frustrated and fearful, I stepped back from the window, suddenly aware that the footsteps had abruptly ceased. Silence flooded back, unnaturally thick. The next morning, when I mentioned it to the others, they brushed it off as a bad dream or my imagination. I tried to convince myself they were right. After all, we'd come here to relax, not to chase ghosts. But later, walking along the beach, we stumbled across something that reignited my fears. Fresh footprints, deep and strangely shaped, marked a chaotic trail across the sand. There was something unsettling about them, their size and spacing oddly irregular. They didn't belong to any of us, and we hadn't seen anyone else nearby. "Maybe someone else was here earlier," Emma suggested nervously. Hayden shrugged, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to admit it. Probably just a local taking a stroll. Yet these footprints unsettled me deeply. They seemed too strange, too purposeful, leading from nowhere, vanishing just as abruptly at the edge of the water. As darkness fell again, my unease deepened into dread. The wind picked up, rattling the windows, moaning softly through the gaps in the weathered wood. We lit candles and played music to break the tension, but it didn't help. Something felt off, wrong in a way I couldn't define. Then, around midnight, the lights flickered and went out entirely. Panic surged thick and choking. We scrambled for flashlights, their weak beams barely cutting through the oppressive darkness. A scraping sound interrupted us, slow and deliberate against the outer walls. Emma's eyes widened in terror. Lucas stood frozen, flashlight shaking in his hand. "Someone's out there," Hayden whispered hoarsely, voice thick with fear. The scraping grew louder, moving methodically around the house, circling closer. Then the front door rattled violently as if someone, or something, tried desperately to force entry. We backed away, hearts hammering wildly, minds racing. "Who's out there?" Lucas shouted, trying to sound brave. No response, only silence, heavy and absolute. Cautiously, I moved toward a window, peering out carefully. My breath caught sharply. Standing just beyond the porch was a figure, unnaturally tall and slender, hooded, face hidden in shadow. It stood perfectly still, gazing directly at the house, motionless yet terrifyingly present. I recoiled, stumbling back, my voice barely audible. "There's someone outside." The others crowded around, trying to see, but the figure was already gone, vanished into the night, leaving only darkness behind. Still, its presence lingered, palpable, menacing. "We can't stay here," Emma whispered, visibly shaking. "We have to leave." We grabbed essentials quickly, driven by an urgency none of us fully understood. Stepping outside, the air felt colder, heavier, charged with menace. We hurried toward the car, gravel crunching sharply beneath our frantic steps. Yet, as I reached for the car door, my eyes caught movement at the edge of the dunes. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see. The figure stood again, closer now, silently watching. A chill ran through me, cold and deep, as I realized its feet weren't touching the ground. It hovered impossibly, its hooded face staring directly toward us, empty and unreadable. "Get in!" Hayden shouted, snapping me from my paralysis. We piled inside, slamming doors shut, and Hayden sped away, tires spinning wildly. None of us spoke during the long drive home. Words seemed meaningless, incapable of expressing our shared horror. Afterward, the police found no signs of intrusion, no evidence anyone had been there. Even the footprints were gone, washed away by waves. The locals merely shook their heads, dismissing our story as paranoia or imagination. But we knew better. Something had found us there, something not meant to be seen. And it wasn't finished. Even now, safely back home, I wake at night, listening for footsteps, imagining that figure standing silently outside, watching and waiting. Spring break couldn't come quickly enough. After months of exams, assignments, and endless deadlines, the idea of disappearing for a few days was exactly what we needed. Our group, me, Riley, Liam, whose confidence always led us into adventure, Zoe, perpetually cheerful, and Max, quiet and observant, had booked a cabin deep within the dense forests of northern Michigan. We wanted solitude, isolation, a chance to breathe and disconnect from everything. The place we chose was intentionally remote. No cell service, no distractions, just miles of towering pines, winding trails, and wilderness untouched by crowds. As we drove up the narrow dirt road leading toward the cabin, the trees seemed to press closer, darker and more dense, sealing us off from the outside world. Instead of feeling trapped, though, we felt liberated, free from the constant noise of everyday life. We arrived at twilight, the fading daylight turning the sky purple and gray, the air crisp and cool. The cabin appeared suddenly through the thick trees, small and rustic but charmingly inviting. Inside, it was exactly as we'd hoped, simple, with a large stone fireplace, creaky wooden floors, and wide windows overlooking shadowy woods. The first night passed comfortably. We built a fire, laughed, and shared stories. It felt exactly as we'd imagined, a perfect escape. But around midnight, Liam, ever restless, suggested we explore the forest a bit, under the full moon. Reluctantly, we agreed, grabbing flashlights and pulling on jackets before stepping out into the chilly night air. Max's dog, Scout, bounded ahead, curious and eager. The moon hung bright and full above, casting silvery beams through the branches. At first, it was exhilarating, a spontaneous adventure beneath a canopy of stars. But as we walked deeper into the forest, the atmosphere shifted. The woods around us grew unnaturally quiet, as if holding their breath. Even Scout paused, his ears perked up, staring intently into the shadows ahead. "Scout?" Max called softly, but the dog didn't move, frozen, staring into the darkness. I felt the hairs on my neck prickle. Something wasn't right. We moved forward cautiously, flashlights sweeping ahead, catching only darkness and glimpses of pale trees. The silence grew heavier, oppressive. My heartbeat quickened, anxiety building steadily. Then suddenly Scout began whining softly, backing away slowly, tail lowered submissively. "Guys, something's wrong," Zoe whispered nervously. Liam shined his flashlight ahead, illuminating a strange, elongated shadow standing impossibly still among the trees. My blood ran cold. A figure, human-like but distorted, stood motionless, its arms stretched out wide, unnaturally rigid. It was tall, far too tall, and completely silent. We stared, frozen, unable to speak. "Hello!" Liam called, his voice shaking slightly. The figure didn't move or react at all. It simply stood there, silent, waiting. My pulse thundered, instinct screaming to flee. But fear rooted me in place. Then, without warning, the figure shifted, not stepping but gliding forward silently, effortlessly, moving closer without making a single sound. Its arms remained outstretched stiffly, unnaturally rigid, as though reaching towards something unseen. "Run!" Max shouted, finally breaking our paralysis. We bolted toward the cabin, panic overtaking us, Scout barking frantically as he raced alongside. My breath came in sharp gasps, heart hammering painfully. I glanced back once, the figure closing in, gliding smoothly and silently through the trees, barely touching the ground. We reached the cabin, scrambling inside and slamming the door, locking it tight. Breathing heavily, we stared wide-eyed at each other, fear tangible and heavy between us. Zoe sobbed softly, Liam pacing nervously, hands shaking. Max stood by the window, staring outside. "Is it gone?" Zoe whispered anxiously. Max shook his head slowly, face pale. "It's just standing there, watching us." I approached the window, dread twisting inside me. Just beyond the trees, illuminated faintly by moonlight, stood the figure, its long arms still stretched wide, silently facing the cabin, unmoving. It remained that way, impossibly still, as if waiting. "What does it want?" Liam's voice trembled, fear evident. No one had an answer. We huddled near the fireplace, eyes darting nervously toward windows and doors. Hours passed slowly, painfully, the figure unmoving outside, silently waiting. Eventually, exhaustion overtook us, though sleep brought no comfort, only restless dreams filled with darkness and elongated shadows. Dawn arrived slowly, the forest bathed in gray light. With cautious courage, we packed quickly, deciding unanimously we couldn't stay. Outside, the morning air felt cold, eerie, the trees ominous and silent. Yet, no figure remained, just empty woods, as though nothing had ever happened. We drove away quickly, tension gradually easing, but never fully dissipating. On the way home, Max quietly admitted something that made my stomach drop. That figure, its feet never touched the ground. We didn't want anything flashy for spring break. No hotels, no crowded bars, no overpriced resorts. We just wanted to disappear for a while. Something low-key. Quiet. So when Cleo found a cottage for rent in a little beachside town most maps didn't even label, it seemed like the perfect fit. It was me, Nate, along with Cleo, who always took charge, Theo, who was curious to a fault, and Arya, our skeptic, who needed proof before she believed anything. We booked the place for 4 nights. It looked unremarkable in the listing photos. Aged clapboard siding, a small front porch, and just a short walk down to the shore. We arrived mid-afternoon, greeted by a sky washed in soft, coastal gray. The air was thick with salt, the wind low and steady. The owner was already waiting. An older man, skin like creased leather, with a voice that rasped like sandpaper. He handed Cleo the keys with a slow, deliberate motion. "Storm's coming," he said, looking past us, eyes scanning the horizon. "Best not to be outside too late." Cleo gave him a polite laugh. "Thanks for the heads up." But something in the way he said it, too quiet, too hollow, clung to me like damp air. The inside of the cabin was fine. Not luxurious, but not run down either. The floors groaned a little, and a musty smell lingered in the walls, but it had character. We unpacked, cracked open drinks, and by evening we were gathered on the porch, watching the sky shift into sunset, deep crimson clouds bleeding across the ocean. That night, the wind picked up. We lit a fire in the pit behind the house and sat around roasting marshmallows, telling the kinds of stories that start funny but end with someone trying to spook the group. At one point, Theo mentioned how the porch light had flickered earlier when he stepped outside. "Probably just bad wiring," Arya shrugged. He laughed. "Or the ghost of spring breaks past." But even as he joked, I noticed the firelight didn't seem to reach the edges of the yard. The trees beyond the cottage stood like tall shadows, silent and unmoving. No birds, no bugs. The wind whistled, but otherwise it was too quiet for a beach town. When we finally came inside, the silence followed. We stayed up talking until one by one, we drifted off. I was the last to head to bed. The fireplace had started to dim, and the cabin felt colder now. As I turned out the lights and passed by the front window, something made me stop. A figure. Tall. Still. Just beyond the porch. I blinked. Gone. I told myself I was tired. Seeing things. I didn't even check again. Just went to my room, climbed under the covers, and tried to shake it off. I was almost asleep when I heard it. Knock. A single sound, heavy and deliberate, from the front door. I held my breath. Knock. Again. Even unhurried. Like whoever was out there wasn't in a rush, just waiting. I sat up slowly, listening. The others weren't reacting. No movement from the other rooms. Just me. I climbed out of bed quietly and stepped into the hallway. Knock. The third one echoed through the house like a warning. I stopped at the edge of the living room. The fire was completely out. The air felt dense, like it hadn't been touched in hours. I approached the front door carefully, slowly, trying not to make a sound. There was no peephole, just the thin curtain over the window. I didn't want to move it. I didn't want to see who, or what, might be on the other side. But I had to. I reached out and pulled the curtain aside. No one. Just the porch. Empty. Still. I let the curtain fall. And then, behind me, from the hallway leading to the bedrooms, footsteps. My blood turned to ice. I turned fast, flashlight in hand, shining it toward the noise. Nothing. Cleo. I called softly. No answer. I walked down the hallway, checked the doors. Everyone was asleep. Except, the temperature in the house had dropped. I could see my breath. It had been chilly earlier, but not like this. That's when I noticed the photograph on the wall. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. A black and white photo. Faded. Framed in warped wood. It showed the cottage, years ago, same structure, but with weather-beaten siding and no railings on the porch. Standing in the corner of the photo, half in shadow, was a figure. Barely noticeable. But it was there. Tall. Hooded. Arms hanging too long. Head turned just slightly toward the camera. I stared, heart pounding, as the wind outside howled and the power flickered. Suddenly, every light in the house went out. Complete darkness. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just waited. Then knock. But this time from the back door. I turned, flashlight shaking in my hand. A distant creak echoed through the house, as if a floorboard had just shifted. Then I heard it. A voice. Right behind me. Not loud. Not angry. Just tired. You shouldn't have come here. I spun around. Empty. I bolted to wake the others. One by one they stirred, confused and groggy, until they saw my face. The fear in my eyes. I didn't need to say much. We have to go, I said. Now. No one argued. We left everything, bags, food, gear, ran straight to the car and drove. No one spoke until the lights of a gas station flickered into view miles down the highway. Cleo finally broke the silence. What did you see? I shook my head. Not what? Who? Back in the town, when the police returned to check on the cottage, they found no one. No signs of forced entry. Nothing strange at all. The owner said he hadn't been there since the day he gave us the keys. He also claimed he'd never hung any photo inside the house. Said the walls had been bare for years. But I know what I saw. And I know what I heard. 3 knocks. Always 3. Like a pattern. A rhythm. A warning. We were supposed to be on vacation. Not, whatever this was. It started like any other spring break. Dumb group texts, last-minute packing, arguing over who forgot the sunscreen. The 4 of us had planned this trip for weeks. Just a few days on the coast to chill out, disconnect, and maybe get a little drunk in the sand. There was me, Jasper, originally from Boise, currently confused most of the time. Juno, who was from Austin and never went anywhere without her weird vintage camcorder. Colby from outside of Savannah, who made everything sound like a joke even when it wasn't. And Teddy, who had moved to Minnesota for college and never let us forget he missed real weather. We'd found the place on some shady-looking rental site, cheap and way off the beaten path. A weird little beach town called Perot's Rest, which honestly sounded fake. The house sat on a hill above the water, all warped siding and leaning porches. But the view? Unreal. The ocean stretched wide and endless, with no hotels, no piers, no people. Just waves and wind, and the smell of salt and old wood. When we pulled in, the sun was setting behind the house, throwing long shadows across the sand. The sky was gorgeous. Pink-orange, with this streak of deep purple that made the water look like ink. "Y'all sure this isn't a murder house?" Colby said, peering at the front door like it might bite him. "Because it definitely has murder house energy." Teddy rolled his eyes. "No one gets murdered in coastal towns. They just vanish mysteriously and show up in a lighthouse journal or some crap." Juno snorted and filmed them from the porch, already narrating like it was a documentary. Day 1, the fools arrive. Spirits are high. IQs are not. The inside of the house was clean enough, just old. The floors creaked like they had opinions, and the furniture smelled faintly of wet rope and lemon oil. Still, we dumped our bags, cracked some beers, and let the sea air do its magic. That first night was everything spring break should be. We lit a bonfire in the pit out back, played music off Teddy's terrible playlist, and watched stars bloom in the sky like scattered pearls. It felt easy, safe, like the kind of night you don't know is perfect until later. But sometime after midnight, the wind shifted. I noticed it first. The way the fire suddenly leaned sideways, like it was bowing to something we couldn't see. The air got colder, sharper. The kind of cold that didn't come from the breeze. It came from somewhere deeper. Juno paused the camera. "Did y'all hear that?" We listened. Nothing. And then something. Faint, like a moan caught in the wind. Not human, but not human either. Colby stood up, brushing ash off his jeans. "I don't like that sound. That's the kind of sound that says, 'Go back to the house, idiot.'" But Juno was already walking toward the edge of the hill where the grass dipped toward the beach. "Come on. You're telling me you don't want to see what it is." I didn't want to see what it was. But we followed her anyway. The beach was weirdly empty. No footprints but our own. The tide was low, and the moon floated above the ocean like a spotlight. Then we saw him. A man, maybe mid-40s, sitting alone at the edge of the water. Not doing anything. Just watching. He wore this old baseball cap and a threadbare windbreaker. His face was pale, too pale, and he didn't react when we got close. Teddy called out, "You okay, man?" No answer. "Should we, go back?" I asked, trying to sound casual. I think we're interrupting his midnight saltwater staring contest. But Colby shook his head slowly. "Nah, he ain't right. Right as in okay. Or right as in not from here. Couldn't say. But yeah, something about him wasn't right." We backed off. We didn't run. Not yet. We walked toward the old pier, thinking we could maybe get a better view of the bay. It looked like it'd fall apart if the wind sneezed too hard. But of course, that didn't stop us. We made it halfway across when the noise came again, louder this time. Like something was under the water, groaning. No waves. No wind. Just that deep, grinding sound. Wet and ragged. Like something breathing with lungs full of ocean. Juno's camera flickered. "I think it's under the pier." "Okay," I said, voice cracking. "What is it, and why is it under us?" And then the man from earlier was behind us. We hadn't heard him come up. 1 minute we were alone. The next he was there. He looked drained, hollow-eyed, his skin gray in the moonlight. And he whispered, "Don't go near the water." No one spoke. We just stared at him. Colby was the first to move, stepping back toward the land. "Yeah, cool. I vote we listen to cryptic, creepy beach guy and go." We turned, but not before we all saw it. In the water, just beneath the surface, something moved. Huge. Too smooth. Too fast. A ripple that didn't belong. It didn't move like a fish or a wave. It moved like something hunting. The pier groaned beneath us. Planks shook. Juno whispered, "It's coming up." Then, rising from the water, it emerged. You ever see something that your brain tries to unsee while you're still looking at it? That's what it felt like. It was shaped like a person, but wrong. Its body slick with something dark and oily. Limbs too long. Face warped like it had been pulled apart and stitched back the wrong way. Eyes wide. Starving. We ran. No hesitation. The kind of run where your heart's already screaming at you and your legs barely keep up. Behind us, I could hear the slapping of wet limbs on wood. It didn't sound like walking. It sounded like crawling. Or dragging. The man didn't follow us. I don't think he ever intended to. Back at the house, we slammed the door, locked it, and didn't say a word. Just huddled in silence, backs against the walls, waiting for the sun to rise. When morning finally came, we left everything behind. Didn't care about the deposit. Didn't care about our stuff. We just got in the car and drove. On the way out of town, we passed a little shack near the edge of the cliffs. A weathered sign read, "Trawler's Watch." Underneath, painted in faded red, "Stay out of the water. It remembers." We didn't talk about it. Not then. Not really ever. but I haven't gone near the ocean since. I don't care if it was real, or if we all just snapped a little under the moonlight. I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. Something rose from the deep that night. Spring break's supposed to be simple. Beach, booze, and no responsibilities. That's what we thought, anyway. Just a quick trip to unwind after midterms. We weren't looking for much, just a change of scenery. No big parties, no wild crowds. Just peace, nature, and maybe a bonfire or two. So we found this mountain cabin listed by some guy named Glenn D. on a travel app that looked like it hadn't been updated since 2014. No reviews. No host photo. Just 3 blurry images of a log cabin surrounded by trees, so dense you could barely see the sky. That should have been the first red flag. But it was cheap, secluded, and available. And we meet Callum, Breyer, who grew up in Vermont and had that no-nonsense forest witch energy, Zeke, pure Midwestern boy, complete with Iowa farm charm, and Quinn, the sarcastic brainiac from Jersey. We're all in desperate need of a place to reset. The drive took forever. By the time we reached the last few miles, the road narrowed into a winding dirt track, so tight we had to slow to a crawl. The trees got thicker, darker, and closer until the sky was just a sliver above us. Zeke kept making jokes about Deliverance and horror movie openings. When we finally reached the cabin, the sun had dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the gravel driveway. The place looked like it had been abandoned for a decade. The paint was peeling. One shutter hung loose. There were deep gouges on the front porch wood, maybe from an animal. Maybe not. You know, Quinn muttered, stepping out of the car. I'm suddenly real into staying at a Motel 6. Breyer ignored him and walked straight up to the door, boots crunching on old leaves. It's fine, she said. It's just old. Creepily atmospheric, sure, but nothing's wrong. Inside it smelled like dust, firewood, and something faintly metallic, like dried blood left too long in the air. That should have been the second red flag. We explored, trying to lighten the mood. The furniture was mismatched and ancient. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, patterned with tiny ferns. In the upstairs hallway, every floorboard creaked loud enough to wake ghosts. Still, by nightfall, we'd settled in. We made chili on the wood stove, told dumb stories by the fire, and watched Zeke try to beat Quinn at cards while Breyer sat on the rug reading a book about Appalachian folklore she found in a drawer. It felt cozy in that moment. But then the stillness started. It was subtle. The way the wind stopped outside. The way the crackling fire suddenly sounded too loud. The way every one of us, at different times, paused mid-sentence like we were listening for something. And then came the scratching. Faint at first. From upstairs. Breyer was the first to notice. Do you hear that? She asked, head tilted. We all froze. It came again. A dry, slow scraping. Like nails on wood. Then a soft thump. Quinn stood up, his face pale despite the firelight. Please tell me that's Zeke messing with us. Zeke looked equally freaked. Bro, I'm right here. We grabbed flashlights, of course, because what else do you do? We crept upstairs as a group. The sound had stopped, but the air was heavier, pressing in against us like the cabin itself was holding its breath. At the end of the hall was a door we hadn't opened yet. None of us had really noticed it before. It didn't stand out. It was flush with the wall, like it was meant to be forgotten. I reached out and turned the knob. Inside, the room was empty. Just a small twin bed, a cracked window, and walls scratched to hell. Dozens of deep gouges ran in vertical lines from floor to ceiling, like someone, or something, had clawed its way around the room, over and over. We didn't say anything. We backed out, slowly, and closed the door. That night, we all crashed in the living room, no one willing to sleep upstairs. The fire was low, casting shadows that stretched too long across the walls. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was Breyer talking in her sleep. But as I sat up, I realized it wasn't coming from her. Or from any of us. It was coming from the walls. Too soft to understand, but rhythmic. Urgent. The kind of whisper that feels like it's meant for you specifically. I sat frozen, breath caught in my throat. Then came the knock. 1, 2, 3. Slow. Heavy. From the front door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. Breyer sat up slowly, eyes wide. Did you hear it? She whispered. We all had. Zeke grabbed the flashlight and edged toward the window beside the door. He peeked through the curtain, and I'll never forget the way his breath fogged the glass as he exhaled sharply. There's someone out there. The whispering stopped. We all crowded behind him, trying to see. At first, there was nothing, just darkness and trees. But then movement. A figure, tall, unmoving, standing just beyond the porch light's reach. Arms at its sides. Head tilted slightly. It didn't knock again. It didn't move. It just stood there. "I'm going back to the car," Quinn muttered. "I don't care if it's 2 in the morning." We didn't leave, not yet. We locked every window, barricaded the doors with furniture, huddled close, watching the figure as it slowly began to fade into the forest like it had never been there at all. The next morning, we found footprints on the porch. Only, they weren't footprints exactly. They were longer, wider, like a hand but wrong, like something walking upright on palms. We packed in silence. On the way down the mountain, the GPS glitched. When it came back, the cabin's pin was gone, like it had never been listed at all. Back at school, we tried not to talk about it, pretended it was just a creepy night in the woods. But sometimes late at night, when I close my eyes, I hear the whisper again. It always says the same thing. Come back. And I don't think it's asking. We thought it was going to be the spring break, to end all spring breaks. Final stretch before graduation. One last trip to make memories before the real world came crashing down. We'd booked a massive house right on the beach. 2 floors, wraparound porch, private access to the sand, the works. It felt like we'd won the lottery. The house was in this touristy town in South Carolina called Drift Hollow, but we were staying on the very edge of it, where the tourists thinned out and the trees looked older, gnarled. It had that old southern coastal charm. Spanish moss. Faded signs. Locals who didn't wave back. The crew, me Sky, Dion, our overly confident friend from Atlanta who always had to be the center of attention, Marley, chill, a little witchy from Oregon, and Kellen, stoic and sarcastic, born and raised in Pittsburgh, always ready with a line like "This is how horror movies start." We got to the house late afternoon. The weather was perfect, the kind of warm that makes your shoulders relax. The sand was soft and dry, the waves gentle. Inside, the house was huge, 5 bedrooms, tall ceilings, old hardwood floors. Definitely built in the 1800s, but well kept. A little too well kept. We found a laminated card in the kitchen the moment we walked in. Taped to the fridge. House rules. Do not open the basement door. Lock all windows before dark. If someone knocks, and no one's expecting company, don't answer. Do not sleep alone. Do not go into the water after midnight. Welcome to Drift Hollow. We laughed. Of course we laughed. Classic rental gimmick, right? Creepy Airbnb marketing is totally a vibe, Marley said, pocketing a photo for Instagram. Dion leaned in dramatically. Do not open the basement, he mimicked in a whisper. Okay, but now I have to. Kellen side-eyed him. Touch the basement, and I will break your fingers. We figured it was a joke. Local color. Some weird owner trying to make the place seem spooky. That night, we drank on the porch and watched the moon rise over the ocean. Everything felt calm, warm, comfortable. But around midnight, the house changed. I don't know how else to put it. It just shifted. The wind stopped. The air inside turned thick, almost humid. The lights flickered, not just once, but in a weird stuttering rhythm, like they were trying to say something. Then came the sound. Knocking. Soft at first, like distant thumping. Then louder. We all froze. It wasn't from the front door. It was from below. Dion stood up, clearly buzzed and way too curious. It's just the pipes or something. Chill. But Marley was already backing up toward the stairs. That's not the pipes. That's not how pipes sound. More knocking. Rhythmic. From the basement door at the end of the hall. I didn't even know the house had a basement. None of us had gone near that door. Not yet. It had 3 locks on it. One of them looked rusted shut. Kellen whispered, "Don't open it." That's on the list. Dion laughed, the kind of nervous laugh people do when they're trying to feel braver than they are. Come on. Y'all don't really believe that freaky list was serious, do you? Then, from behind the door, a voice. Let me out. It sounded like a woman. But not quite. Like someone trying to sound like a woman. Too calm. Too rehearsed. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. Then scratch, scratch, scratch. Something clawing at the other side. I said, "We're not staying here." No one argued. We ran upstairs, slammed every door shut, and gathered in one room. Marley lit sage and muttered something under her breath. Kellen stood by the window with a pocket knife. Then the knocking started again. Not from the basement this time. It came from every door in the house. The back door. The side porch. Even the second-floor balcony. always in threes. Dion was pale now. Who? Who the hell's knocking from the balcony? We're on the second floor. Then the lights flickered again and died. Complete darkness. We huddled together, breathing in the dark. Outside, the ocean no longer sounded gentle. The waves were crashing now, furious and loud. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The screen lit up, and the house rules had returned. This time in red. The last rule had changed. Do not leave the house until dawn. We had broken a rule. We had gone outside after midnight. And something had followed us back. Around 3 a.m., Dion whispered. I saw something in the mirror. What mirror? Kellen asked. In the hallway. The one with the gold frame. There is no mirror in the hallway. Dion's voice broke. There was. There was last night. I looked in it and it looked back. We didn't sleep. We didn't move. At one point, Marley said the air tasted like copper. Kellen started muttering things under his breath I've never heard him say before. Prayers, maybe? Or something older. At dawn, the house let go. We felt it. The pressure lifted. The lights came back on. The air cleared. The house was just a house again. We didn't wait. We packed our bags, got in the car, and peeled out of that driveway before the sun had fully risen. We didn't talk about it during the ride home. Didn't talk about the knocking, or the mirror, or the voice behind the basement door. But 2 days later, Marley texted us a photo. The screenshot of the rental listing was gone. The house, no longer on the app. No trace of it. In its place was a blank white box that simply read, Property delisted, violated house rules.